My name is Tom Moran. In this videotape, we're going to show you the Notecards system, which is a system we've been developing here to explore ways to aid users in authoring complex documents. The videotape is in two parts. In the first part, we'll show you the Notecards system and show you how it can be used in the authoring process. In the second part, we'll discuss some of the key research issues that surround the design of the system, and then we will tell you about some of the key ideas we think are necessary to explore in order to make significant improvements in the authoring process. We use the term authoring very broadly. By authoring, we mean not just the processes of crafting words and pictures into documents, but the processes that precede them of articulating and structuring the ideas that are to be presented. The Notecards system is based on a very simple model of the authoring process. We start with sources of information. From these sources, we extract notes which select out the relevant information. Then we must make sense of these notes by organizing them and building structures that tie them together. Finally, we're ready to craft the final document, which can be read by others. The key germinating idea for us in this model is the notion that ideas are ideally recorded on physical sets of note cards. Note cards are ideal because, first of all, it's easy and informal to be able to jot down an idea as it occurs to me or as I find it. And when I jot down an idea, it's done independently of the other notes that I have. Yet it's very easy to arrange and rearrange the notes to discover appropriate structures for making sense of all the notes. The Notecards system that we've been developing is being programmed in the Interlisp-D programming environment, and it runs in that environment. What the Notecards system does essentially is implement a set of electronic note cards that very much mimic the physical note cards. What electronic note cards give us that physical note cards don't is the ability to explicitly link and draw links between the note cards, and therefore to build up complex structures or networks relating the notes. Let's take a look at a demo of the system. Frank Halasz will demonstrate the system first by laying out the basic elements and concepts of the Notecards system. Then he'll take you through a tour of an example of a real authoring process.
In the first part of this demonstration of the Notecards system, I'd like to illustrate for you the basic concepts of the system. For this purpose, I'll be using a toy database consisting of a few note cards linked into a very small network. The purpose is to make as clear as possible the concepts inherent in the system. In the second part of this demonstration, I'll be showing you the power of the Notecards system in a real-world application. So let me begin on the basic concepts. The basic object of the Notecards system is a note card. We see an example here in the center of the screen. It contains a small bit of text about a fellow named Bill Jones. The title of this note card is appropriately Jones, Bill. If I want to create another such note card, I move up here to the Notecards main menu and choose the Create command, which brings up a blank card, which I'll title Menlo Project, because I'm going to enter some text about the Menlo Project. I can just enter text freely into this card, and I'll say it's the greatest project ever. And I left out the S, so I'll fix it up. It's the greatest project ever. Now, the second basic concept in note cards is the link between note cards. Bill Jones and the Menlo Project are related by the fact that Bill Jones works on the Menlo Project, and I want to indicate that relation by inserting a link between the two note cards. So I move to the Bill Jones card and ask it to insert a link. The system asks me for the type of that link. Now, a type of a link is simply the name for the relation between the two note cards. And I see that Works on link is already available, so I'll choose that. The system then asks me for which card will be at the other end of this link, and I'll choose the Menlo Project card. You see that the system inserts a link icon into the Bill Jones card. If I press that link, the system will retrieve from the Notecards database the related card. Or in this case, since the related card Menlo Project is already on the screen, it simply flashes the card. Now the link icon can be displayed with additional information, so let me change the link display mode. And we see that in the Bill Jones card we have a link icon for a works on relation to the Menlo Project card. Let me create an additional card, which I'll call the Sam Smith card because it's about a fellow named Sam Smith. I'll enter some information about Sam Smith, first his name, and then say that he's a high school graduate. Now Sam is related both to the Menlo Project and to Bill Jones. Sam is Bill Jones' boss, so let me indicate that by a boss of link between the two cards. I'll choose Insert Link, look through my link type list, and notice boss of is not an available link. So I'll create a new link type, boss of, and then indicate I'd like to make that link to the Bill Jones card. So you see here we have a boss of link to Jones, Bill. Now let me make a works on link between Sam Smith and Jones, Bill and the Menlo Project. So I choose works on, and then it asks me to specify the card at the other end of the link, and I don't have to point directly to Menlo Project, but can point to the Menlo Project link icon in Jones, Bill, which is the same thing as pointing to the Menlo Project card itself. You see here that we have a works on relation to the Menlo Project card. Now the Menlo Project card is pointed to by both the Bill Jones card and by the Sam Smith card. And the Menlo Project card knows that fact, and I can ask it to display the links that point to it. So you see here that the Menlo Project card knows there's a works on link from Sam Smith and a works on link from Bill Jones. So now I've created 3 cards related together by a network of links. This is the basic level of organization in note cards, a network of interrelated note cards connected by typed links. Now the note card system can build maps of this network structure, and we call these maps browsers, and the browser is simply another type of note card, a special type of note card. The browser is built by recursively following the links from a given card. So I'll specify this browser should start from the Sam Smith card, and it asks me what sort of links I'd like to follow, and I'll follow the boss of links and the works on link that we created before. The system will then compute the browser graph, ask me for a title. I'll call this card a network card. And we see here that from Sam Smith there are 2 links, one to Jones, Bill, and one to the Menlo Project. That corresponds to the 2 link icons we see in the Sam Smith card. In particular, this line between Sam Smith and Bill Jones is the same link, represents the same link as this link icon that says boss of Bill Jones within the Sam Smith card. So we see that the browser is simply a graphical depiction of the network between these note cards. The note card system contains a third concept, which is a filing mechanism designed to help users organize their note card collections. The major component of this filing system is a special note card called a file box. A file box is simply a place to keep note cards. Every note card should be filed in at least one file box, in addition to any links it has to related note cards in its network. So I've created a file box, which I'll call People here. And in this file box, I'd like to file the Sam Smith and Bill Jones note cards. And you see here that we filed in the People file box Sam Smith and Bill Jones. Let me create a second file box, which I'll call Projects. And this time I'll go to the Menlo Project card and ask that the Menlo Project card be filed in the Project file box. We see that the Menlo Project is now filed in the Projects file box. Now notice that file boxes can contain other file boxes as well as note cards. In fact, every file box is filed in some other file box, creating a hierarchy of file boxes within file boxes. Now People and Projects are simply parts of another file box, which I'm going to call the directory of the Widgets lab. directory widgets lab. And inside this directory of widgets lab, I'd like to file its two parts, people and projects. We see that people and projects are sub-file boxes of this larger file box directory : widgets lab. So what I've done is created a simple hierarchy of file boxes within this system. And let me quickly create a browser that depicts this file box hierarchy. Starting from the directory widgets lab, I'll follow sub-box and filed card links. And you see here that, let me call this the file box browser. And we see here that from the directory of widgets lab, it has two sub-file boxes, people and projects. And within people and projects are filed the note cards. Let's compare this browser with the browser we created earlier. And we see that there are two alternative organizations for the three note cards we've created. First, there is the network of relations between note cards, as instantiated by the links between the note cards. And second of all, there's the categorization structure, which has been created by this file box hierarchy shown in this second browser. So to summarize, there are four major concepts in the note card system. There are note cards, which contain small units of text or graphics. There are the links between note cards, which show the relations between that text and graphics. There are file boxes that form a hierarchical filing mechanism. And there are browser cards that graphically depict either the note card network or the file box hierarchy. Next, I'd like to show you how note cards could be used in a real application. For this purpose, I'll be using a note file created by Ken Allen, a graduate student in German history from Stanford University. Ken was a test user of the note card system. He used the system to research and then write a paper on the NATO missiles crisis in Western Europe. Today, what I'd like to do is to show you how Ken would go about collecting a note and then linking it into the network in his NATO missiles note file. Then I'll give you a retrospective of how Ken actually used the system to write a paper based on this network of note cards. Let's begin our exploration of the NATO missiles note file by looking at the top-level file box. Ken used this top-level file box as a toolbox in which to keep the various tools he was using in order to research and write this paper on the NATO missiles crisis. For example, this topics file box was the top-level file box in the file box hierarchy in which Ken kept the note cards he was collecting while reading the various articles on NATO missiles. So this was the top-level file box in his categorization hierarchy of all the note cards in the system. Another tool in his top-level file box was this bibliography file box. The bibliography file box basically contained pointers to all of the articles Ken was reading while researching the NATO missiles crisis. For example, if we point to the Newsweek card here, we'll see that it's simply a bibliographic reference to a Newsweek article which Ken read in hard copy and then took notes on and entered into the system. Some of the entries in the bibliography file box point to entire articles which are kept online. They were either scanned in or typed in their entirety, and Ken took notes off them online. And we see here that this is an entire text of an article from Science magazine called Deployment Shakes Politics. And if I scroll down a little bit into the article, I'll come across an interesting paragraph that reads, "The Soviets complain and the Europeans widely believe that the Pershing II is intended primarily as a first-strike weapon by the United States." Well, that's an interesting claim, and I'm going to take a note on it. Create a note card, shape it to a reasonable size, and then copy the text from the original article into the new note card. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is title this note card, assign a title which I'll call Soviet First Strike Claim. Next thing I'll do is designate or assign the source of this card. So I'll ask the system to designate sources, which will be this Deployment Shakes Politics article. Then let me look at this source. So I'll ask the system to show all links coming out of this card. And you'll see there's only one link, a source link, coming out of this card to Deployment Shakes Politics. So that if I ever want to examine the source of the information in this card, I'll always have a pointer to the original article. The second thing I want to do is look at this first sentence. It claims that the Soviets claim that the Pershing II is a first strike weapon. Now, I remember taking a note yesterday that directly contradicts that information, and I'd like to find that note somewhere in my system. Now, there are multiple ways of finding it, but this time I'm going to go look in my index. Now the index is a file box that basically keeps a set of file boxes that categorize my note cards, or many of my note cards, by keyword or by keyword. So for example, I'm going to look in the flexible response file box, which keeps all of those pointers to all of those note cards which can categorized under the keyword flexible response. Looking through the flexible response cards, I noticed this missile gap question, which is indeed the card that I was searching for. So if we look at this card, it is a card talking about a statement by Defense Secretary Harold Brown, which directly contradicts this first strike claim by the Soviets. So let me go back to this original card and insert a contradiction link. I see there are no contradiction link types in the system already, so let me create the contradiction link type and build a contradiction link to the missile gap question card. Let me redisplay that so the link type is a little clearer. We see that we have a contradiction link between the first strike claim and the missile gap question. So now I've hooked this first strike claim card into the note card network by linking it to missile gap question. The next thing I might want to do is to file this note card in the appropriate file boxes. To do so, I'm going to bring up my topic browser. Now the topic browser is simply a browser which shows, starting from the topic box, all of the sub-box relations, so that TNF doctrine is a sub-box of the topics file box, and so on. Looking through this categorization hierarchy, I see that Soviet TNF doctrine is likely to be the file box in which I'd like to keep my new note card. Glancing through the note cards in this Soviet TNF doctrine box, I see that is indeed the case. Let me ask the system to file my new note card in a set of file boxes. So let me file it in Soviet TNF doctrine, and just for safety's sake, let me also file it in the no first use proposal file box. Okay, so I'm going to multiply categorize this note card into two different file boxes. So you see the system has filed it in the Soviet TNF doctrine file box, and it's also filed it in, if I can bring up the no first use proposal file box, it's also filed it in the no first use proposal file box here. Okay. So now I've not only hooked it into my note cards network, but I've filed it into an appropriate file box. The next thing I want to do is read further in my note card and notice this last sentence here. It says that the Soviets believe that the Pershing II is capable of reaching Moscow, which is 2,500 miles away. Well, that itself is an interesting claim, and I'd like to discover whether that is indeed the case. I remember that somewhere in my system is a map of Western Europe, and I'd like to locate that map. Again, there are several ways I can locate that map, but this time I'll choose to use the search card method. So I create a search card and ask it to search for cards with map in the title. The search card will look through the entire database for cards with a string map in the title and place them in this search card. Once they're in the search card, I can then retrieve them from the database. And the result will be a card which contains a map of Western Europe. And on this map are superimposed the missile ranges for the major missiles placed in Western Europe. You'll notice also in this map are a number of link icons placed around the map. For example, if I point to the link icon here near Britain, it will retrieve the note card that contains information about the 160 GLCMs based in the United Kingdom. Similarly, if I go over here near Sicily and point to the link icon near Sicily, I'll retrieve the note card referring to the GLCMs based in Sicily. So I've been able to lay out link icons spatially on the map. The second thing I'd like to note on this map is that these missiles based here in Britain actually have a range that reaches Moscow. So it seems that this Soviet claim is indeed correct. There are missiles that reach Moscow from one of the NATO countries. However, I'm not quite sure about the reliability of the information inside of this map, and I'd like to find out where did I get this information? What is its source? To do so, I'm going to create a browser. Okay. Now the browser is going to start from this map card, and it's going to search the source links. That it's going to find the source card of the map and find the source of that card and so on down the line. And you see that it results in a fairly simple browser card here. The source of this map is a table called US and Soviet TNFs. In turn, the source of this table is this card called Treverton Nuclear Weapons in Europe. Let me retrieve this Treverton card, and we'll see that it's a bibliographic reference to a book by Gregory Treverton. Let me examine the property list attached to this card. And you'll see that one of the properties attached to this card is a reliability property with a value of 0.98. When Ken originally read this book, he judged the book to be highly reliable, a very reliable source of information. So he attached a reliability property to the bibliographic reference, stating the fact that it was very reliable on a scale from 0 to 1. So since this is a very highly reliable source, I'm basically going to believe that this table is correct. And since the table is correct, I'm going to basically believe that the missile ranges map is correct. So this claim that missiles can reach Moscow is in fact correct and receives support from this table. So let me indicate that in my note card. I'm going to insert a support link between this card and the missile ranges map. So the next time I read the first strike claim, I'll know that somewhere in the system is a map that in fact supports the claim that missiles can reach Moscow. So Ken basically took note cards in this manner, linking them into the note card network by linking them to related cards, and then placing them in the appropriate file boxes. Once he'd collected 600 or so of these note cards by reading this sequence of sources, Ken started to write his paper. And let me go through the steps that he used to write that paper. The first thing he did was examine his file box hierarchy. So here you see the file box hierarchy, which I showed you before. Ken basically examined each of the file boxes in this hierarchy, took all of the note cards out of the file boxes and recategorized them into new file boxes, into a new set of file boxes. This resulted in a new file box hierarchy, which you'll see up here. Okay. Now this is the file box hierarchy that Ken created with the goal of writing a paper in mind. Okay, and you'll see that this file box hierarchy is considerably more regular than the file box hierarchy Ken created while collecting notes, while reading the references. It's also a lot wider and a lot shallower of a categorization hierarchy than his original hierarchy. Once he had completed the process of recategorizing all of his note cards into a new topic hierarchy, Ken used the recategorization to create a paper outline. And here's an example of here is his paper outline. And you see what he did was to create sections based on the sections in his topic hierarchy, the major sections of his paper. And in each section he wrote a little text which was basically to be the theme of that section of the paper. And underneath the text, he collected those note cards that he thought would be relevant, or pointers to those note cards that he thought would be relevant to that section of text. So for example, under weapon characteristics, he went down into his topic hierarchy and looked in the TNF characteristics of TNF missiles, as well as all of its sub-boxes, for note cards that might be relevant to the section on weapon characteristics. The result was these 5 note cards which Ken thought were relevant to this section on weapon characteristics. He did that for every major section in his paper. Once the entire paper was fleshed out in this way, he went back and considered each section in turn. For each section, he placed the section on the screen, scrolled to that section, and then he took each of the note cards in that section and put them up on the screen around the outline. As you see here. So as he placed the cards around the screen, as I'm doing here, he then used these cards to help him fill out the text of that section. He did not actually copy the text from the note cards, but he used the note cards placed around the outline as references to composing the text. Each time he finished a major section of the test, he included a pointer back to the note card which he used as reference for that text. So the result was a piece of text, as you see here, which is basically a fleshed out outline with completed text prose in it. And you see that at each point after a major section of text, there's a footnote pointer back to the note card from which that section of text came. okay, which was the reference for that section of text. Once he had gone through the entire outline, fleshing out each section into some sort of prose, Ken went back and connected the sections together, smoothing over the differences between sections and so on, basically producing final prose. And what you see here is the final draft of the paper that Ken produced. Okay, here's the weapon characteristics section, and you see that here's a piece of text that's nice and smoothed over with well-written sentences and so on. And at the end of each major section of the text is a footnote pointer back to the note card from which that section of text derived. So you see, this is the final document Ken produced in this system, a paper on the NATO missiles crisis in Germany, together with references to the note cards from which he derived this paper. So let me briefly go over how Ken went about using the note card system to write this paper. Ken started with a series of sources, some of which were hard copies, some of which were online, and he kept them all together in his bibliographic file box. As he read the sources, he took notes, connected those notes together into a note cards network. And he also filed the notes into a categorization hierarchy, which I showed you in this initial topic browser. Once all the sources were read and all the notes were taken, Ken went back and recategorized all of his note cards into a new topic hierarchy, which I showed you in this final topic browser. Once all the notes were recategorized, Ken returned to the topic browser and created from that a paper outline. Now, the outline consisted of a small piece of text plus the relevant pointers to the relevant note cards for each section. Once that outline was created, Ken went back and, retrieving each of the note cards, used those note cards to flesh out the text in each section. Once the outline had been expanded in that manner, Ken went back and smoothed over the differences between sections and fixed up the sentences to write a rough draft of his final paper. So you see that Ken was able to use the note card system to move all the way from sources and notes on sources to the production of a final draft of a paper on the NATO missiles crisis.
As you can see, the note card system is more than just a computer-based tool. It's a whole environment for supporting the whole range of processes involved in the authoring process. The note card system is an evolving system. We're continually adding enhancements to it as we learn from the experience of our user community. There are many issues involved in developing the system, and we'll discuss some of them in the next part of the tape. But even as it stands right now, the system appears to be quite useful, since it focuses its users on dealing explicitly with their ideas as ideas. And it's just this tendency of it to focus the users on their ideas that leads us to believe that it has real potential for improving the quality of the authoring process.